Hey, it's John with Smart Edition Academy, and today's video we're going to go over how to create an effective study schedule for the HESI A2 exam. We're going to go over things like the foundation of what you need to know in order to really maximize and retain the information during your study sessions. Some really important things that kind of go into that. We're going to talk about two different methods for creating a really effective study schedule, and then we're going to go ahead and actually create them. I'm going to share my screen, I'm going to show you how to do it, and then you can go on and create a study schedule for yourself. Now, there are two other videos I want you guys to check out. They really go and complement, they're sort of sister videos to this video, and those are going to be how to pass the HESI A2 test, and then also how to study effectively, and just kind of in general, a lot of tips and tricks for how to effectively study. And those are going to be in the description below. Also, in the description below, there is a link to a free HESI practice test. There's a link to our Facebook study group that has a lot of people, thousands of people just like yourself, studying for the HESI test, kind of sharing what's working for them, sharing good resources, asking questions, getting answers. So I want you guys to join that Facebook study group. So the foundation of a good study schedule is something called active recall. Now, don't get worried if that sounds like a fancy word or terminology. What it really means is that you need to be exercising your brain to recall the information that you just learned. You have to actively use your brain to remember things. You have to force your brain to recall that information, and when you do that, it's going to help you actually memorize that information. So if you were to study something for an hour, for a day, and you never come back to it, over time you're going to forget that information. So you have to keep recalling that information. And ideally, you want to do active recall right after you study. So I'm going to give you a couple ways that you can do this active recall while you're creating a study schedule. The first is going to be, you're in your study guide book, you're reading a chapter, you're in the online course, you're doing a lesson module. What you want to do right after you finish is close the book, close out the online course, and open up a Word doc or just on a piece of paper, write out what you can remember from that lesson. You're forcing your brain to recall that information. So write everything out that you can remember, and you don't go high level. These are like bullets. You don't have to get in too much detail, but you're just kind of doing the exercise of recalling the information. Then you can go and open your book back up, go back into the course, and kind of see what you missed, see what you were not able to remember. And doing this exercise kind of over and over again will help you really memorize things for the long term. Now, another thing you can do is after you have studied from the book or a lesson module, you can kind of make your own practice questions. And again, this is going to make you recall the information and even write a question about it. So maybe you're studying the science section and you're studying the scientific method. You can write a question, after you've finished studying, what is the scientific method? What are the steps to the scientific method? List them out. And again, this is just kind of helping you to recall that information. So another kind of fundamental thing while you're creating your study schedule is to understand the concept of distributed learning. Okay, it sounds like a lot, but really all it's saying is that it is better to study a little bit more frequently than to cram everything into one big study session. You can take something like skiing or snowboarding. If you go skiing or snowboarding once or twice in a whole winter season, you're never really going to learn how to get good at it. But if you go every weekend, if you go 2 to 3 times a week for an entire ski season, you're going to get really good at it. But you have to do that repetition, and you can't really get good at it otherwise. Studying is going to be the same thing. So you really just need to make sure that you're building in repetition and kind of sticking to that, but you don't want to say something like, I'm just going to study on Saturdays a couple, 4 times a month. That's not going to work. You need to be doing more frequently than that. So I want to talk about a method of studying and creating a schedule called spaced repetition. What this really means is that you want to have that repetition, but you want to space it out. So if you are studying a topic, let's say within math, say for the HESI test, and you want to study a particular topic, maybe dividing a fraction by a fraction. What you don't want to do is just study that one time and then move on and never go back to it. So you need to do the repetition, but you want to space it out. So you might want to do, if this is a weak area especially, on Monday, study dividing a fraction by a fraction. And then also study it on Wednesday, go back to it. And then again on Saturday, go back to it. And then the following Monday, go back to it. So let's take a look at this in practice. There's going to be 2 different types of study schedules that we're going to go over. We're actually going to create them right now. I'll share my screen in just a moment. The type of study schedules that we're going to create are called revision timetables. And really what that means is we're going to create a timetable on a calendar or in an Excel sheet, a Google sheet that really plans out for us when we're going to go back to certain topics and kind of do some revision on it and understand them better. So there's two types of revision timetables. One is called a retrospective timetable, and that means that retrospectively we're going to look backwards. We're going to look at what we've been studying and how we feel about it. We're going to say, I've been studying dividing a fraction by a fraction, or if you're doing the chemistry or the physics for the HESI section or for the HESI test, you're going to rate yourself on you're going to rate yourself on how you feel about those subjects, maybe on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. And you might say, I feel like I'm at a number 2. I don't really know it well. So I'm going to plan to go back and study that information. But you're kind of looking backwards at how you feel and then bring in what you want to study more of. The other type of revision timetable is called a prospective revision timetable. And this means we're going to look forward. We're going to plan everything out. We're not really going to look backwards too much. And we're going to plot out on a sheet or on a calendar, on these days, during these hours, we're going to study these exact topics. And we're going to kind of continue to do that repetition. So we add them in and spread them out a little bit. We revisit everything, but we're only looking forward. We're not really looking backwards. So those are going to be differences. And we'll get into it right now and you'll kind of get more of an idea of what I'm talking about. So let's go ahead and create a revision timetable. This is going to be a retrospective revision timetable. And this sheet that we're looking at is in the description below. So I'll show you how to fill it out, how to create this study schedule, and then you can use that link in the description, get this sheet, and create it yourself. So the first thing we want to do is, have a sheet, a Google sheet or an Excel sheet, whatever works for you. And in the first column, we want to put the topics for this subject area of the test. Now, in the bottom, I have tabs for each subject section of the HESI test. So there is biology, chemistry, A&P, physics, reading, the vocabulary, grammar, math, English, all the way down the line. But you want to go ahead and put in the topics. Now, this is going to be pre-filled for you if you use that sheet. But if you have a study guide, you can use the table of contents of that study guide. That will give you the topics. Or if you have an online course like the Smart Edition Academy online course, when you go to take a practice test, you will get a scored report that has all of those topics and kind of how you did on each of those questions that relate to those topics in that subject area. So that's where I got all of these topics from, and I put that in the first column. And then on the first row, you want to put the start date. That's going to be the first day that you sit down to study, say, the cardiovascular system. So we'll put a date there. And then each time you go back and study that topic another day, that will be your revision 1, revision 2, 3, 4, and so on down the line. And this is kind of building in that spaced repetition. So let's go ahead and start filling this out. I'll say, I'll start with cardiovascular system. And let's say I study that on 625. And what you want to do is rate yourself on how well you feel you know that subject, and be honest with yourself. So I'm going to say for cardiovascular system, I did not feel good about it. I did some of the practice questions. I did the end of section test. I got all those questions wrong. I don't feel like I know it very well. I need to spend more time on that. So I'm going to give myself a 2. Right. And then on the same day, I also studied the endocrine system and I felt really good about that. So I'm going to give myself an 8. And the next day, let's say I did gastro. I felt pretty good. I'll give myself a 5. Also that day, I did the integumentary system and I'll give myself a 1. Did not feel good about that. And you go ahead and just kind of continue to fill out this whole sheet as you study each of these topics, right? I'll fill this out all the way and, let's just take these numbers that are in there. So I'll change them around a little bit. All right. Okay. So now let's say I did a lot of this studying. It is now Tuesday and I want to decide what am I going to study for the A&P section of the test. What am I going to study today? What topics will I review? So I want to look at this and say, clearly I got a number. I ranked myself a 1 for the integumentary system and I ranked myself a 2 for the cardiovascular system. and a 3 here and a 3 here, but I'm not really going to need to go back and study the urinary system where I gave myself a 10, or the endocrine where I gave myself an 8. So that's just what I'm going to do. I'm going to focus on these areas, and you can rank yourself in other ways. It doesn't have to be on a scale of 1 to 10. You could put red for you need to study it more, green for you know it well, yellow for I'm okay but I need more help in it. Or you can also, take the practice test. There's a link to a free practice test in the description, or if you have the online course, after you take the practice test and get the scored report, it gives you, the actual percentages that you did on each section. So I can see here, I got a 50% in cardiovascular questions, 100% on the endocrine, a 33% on muscular. So, you can pop in these percentages into this sheet as well. So I might put in 33%, and that would be the one that I want to be studying more. So we'll continue to move on. And what we're doing is looking backwards at everything that we've studied, how we have rated ourselves for that. And then that is what we're going to study for that day. So I'll go ahead and on 628, I'm going to study the integumentary system, and I'm feeling much better about it. I'm going to give myself a 5. And I also did the cardiovascular system, and I'm feeling much better about that. I'll give myself an 8. And I also did maybe the respiratory system. And I did that the next day on 629. And I was a 3. Now I'm feeling a bit better about it. I'm going to give myself a 6. Right, and you kind of continue to fill this out. And you should start to see yourself ranking yourself better and better, higher and higher scores. So you kind of just build this out as you go through and revisit these topics, and you're doing that active recall, you're doing the spaced repetition. You should start to see yourself ranking most of these topics with a much better score until you're ranking yourself a 10 or as close as you can to those types of numbers. So that's how this works. We're looking backwards at everything we studied, and really on our next study session, focusing on the topics that we thought were the weakest. And again, if I had to go here and study again, I'm going to pick the one that I ranked myself as a 5, and that's what I'm going to study next. So maybe I do that on 7.3, and I'm feeling a lot better now. I'm going to rate myself a 9. And so that's how you kind of build out this schedule, where you're always focusing on those weak areas, and you're kind of filling out your schedule as you go along. Now, this is going to be opposite from what we'll do next, which is going to be a prospective revision timetable. So this is really putting out on a calendar exactly what you're going to study every single day, and you stick to that. So you don't wake up that day and say, what should I study today? Well, I'll look back at what I'm doing and pick my weakest topic. You're going to look forward and just plot everything out on a calendar. You're going to stick to that, and you're going to study those topics on each of those days. So let's start on this calendar. I'm going to start on Monday, and I'll put, let's say I want to study cardio, skeletal, and maybe the urinary system. What you want to do is build in that spaced repetition, getting that active recall, right? So we're going to put any particular topic on the first day we study it. We're going to put it on the next day, the following day. We're also going to go back and study those topics. And then we want to put it 1 week later on the calendar. And then 1 month later. So it can be 4 or 5 weeks, depending on how much time you have to study. I'll just put it down here. 1 month later from when we started. Right. And so now you're building in that spaced repetition, and you're doing that active recall, and you just want to go ahead and fill out your calendar in this way. So I'll go here, and maybe we want to do the nervous system, and I'm going to put it again here. And we'll put it 1 week later and 1 month later. And you fill out your schedule in this way, kind of on a calendar. So I know every day what I'm going to be studying, and I've built in that spaced repetition. I'm revisiting things. Now, some people only study for a week and they try and cram for the test. This type of study schedules are not going to work out for you. This is more meant for people who have a few weeks to study, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, or longer. You should be able to fit in all your topics. If you're putting in a good amount of study time each day or each week, you should be able to fit all of these topics in in there. And if you have topics that you're really comfortable with, let's say you're scoring 90% on the practice test for math, you don't really need to put math into your study schedule. You're already really competent in math. You want to put in the subjects that you feel you need a little more help on. So you can also kind of rank on the end and, put in the calendar how you felt about it. So you could rank yourself 1 through 10 or use that color coding. So that's kind of how you use this. And you just build out your whole calendar. Every day, you know exactly what you're studying, you're revisiting stuff, you're reinforcing it, you're doing that active recall, the spaced repetition, all the things we've talked about. And this is how you create that prospective timetable. So now you should be able to go ahead and do this yourself. There's a couple tips that I want to share with you guys about studying effectively. Now, a lot of people will go to create their study schedule and they're going to block out 6 hours. Now, there's something to be said about studying effectively versus just studying. Now, what happens is sometimes we're not feeling it. We can't get in that flow state. We just can't bring ourselves to do it, but we're going to sit there for 6 hours. And what we end up doing is just kind of staring at a page. We're not actually getting a lot done. So we might only study for 2 hours, really studied for 2 hours out of those 6 hours, and that's a lot of wasted time. So just be cognizant of that. If you need to walk away, if you need to reschedule, if you need to change things around, do that. But just make sure that while you're studying, you've plotted this schedule, make sure you're being effective when you're doing it. Another thing that helps when you're creating the study schedule is to kind of create a little bit of pressure on yourself in regards to the timetable for that day. And what I mean by that is to kind of put something before your study time and put something after your study time, or purposely schedule it so that maybe it's between 1 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and at 4 o'clock you have to go to work. So you're not going to waste that time. You're not going to squander it away not studying, because you have a hard stop, you need to get it done, and then you're going to leave. And the same thing in the morning, maybe you have something you need to be doing. And so it kind of forces you to really make sure that you're studying during that time. And hey, pressure makes diamonds in a lot of cases, and you guys are diamonds. So I want to see that happen for you guys. So, just take that into account and see if it's something that would work for you guys. So as I mentioned, there's 2 other videos I want you guys to watch. You can see them right up here. This is going to be how to pass the HESI test, and also how to study for the HESI test with kind of more general tips and tricks. Now, if you like this video, leave a comment below. Let us know if there's any other study tips or tricks for your study schedule that have worked, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys in the next video.